and gentlemen. I've been given 20 minutes to summarize my dissertation. In my lecture, I will walk you through reciprocal drawing, which is the focus of my study, the questions, the field of performance drawing, in which my study is located, originality and relevance, methodology and structure, and opportunities which reciprocal drawing brings, and finally the main theoretical concepts which underlie it. The persons who contributed and participated in the collaborative experiments presented in my research are and were Ola Piechnik, a Polish dancer, Bram Samocha, an Israeli London-based artist and curator, and Janika Pevna, an Estonian and New York-based artist. So, to the focus. The focus are the processes and products of reciprocal drawing, a method of collaborative drawing developed in my research, which engages direct contact and codependence between the drawers. To draw together, the collaborators establish a connection between their bodies in the ways dancers or performers do. They utilize a reciprocal partnering strategy, the one which imposes codependence, to achieve a common drawing-related goal. So here their bodies' codependence in drawing is problematic and raises questions of practical nature. How can such a codependence be arranged in drawing at all? And what can the practice of drawing gain from reciprocal partnering strategies of performance? But also a question of epistemological nature. What is the meaning of performance drawing? We're going over now to the field of within which my research is placed. The study is located within performance drawing, a contemporary field of practices that combine haptic engagement with materials and tools and heightened awareness of self and of the drawing action being displayed to viewers or to a camera. So this shifts the focus from the end product to the process of drawing and the marking body and its movement. Reciprocal drawing, as far as originality is concerned, reciprocal drawing employs three performative frames in original ways to make drawing in contact possible. And these are a reciprocal partnering strategy, the one that engages contact, a repertoire of actions developed by me based on Laban Movement Analysis in this research, LMA in short. LMA is a comprehensive system that was invented by the dancer Rudolf Laban. It enables understanding of functional and expressive content of movement. And my repertoire is a collection of gestural motifs which the collaborators may use in their collaborative exchange, and they may jointly interpret them in drawing. My interest in theory and categorization of movement links my repertoire to Tricia Brown's drawn vocabularies developed by her for her choreographic purposes. But also the repertoire is distantly linked to Jerzy Grotowski's body's ABCs. The third frame is the score. So we have a reciprocal partnering strategy, a repertoire of actions, and the score. That is my diagrams and rules which enable the collaborators aiming in space or within the drawing surface. The score and rules, and particularly the diagrams, imbue their action with purpose, with a direction. So the various scores were originally composed by the Fluxus artists. And although these three frames have been applied before in performance drawing, this research further jointly develops them to tackle challenges emerging from application of reciprocal partnering strategies in drawing. Now, going over to the relevance of my research. How is it relevant? Most collaborative projects involving drawing utilize partnering strategies that do not involve direct touch. This is much easier, simply. Such as, for example, synchronicity of motions, or mimicking, or moving in unison, or alternation of motions. So these come out pretty nicely in drawing, in collaborative drawing. My research focuses on reciprocal partnering strategies, where the physical codependence between the drawers is involved. And since such a contact is quite challenging to establish within the context of drawing, I have found reciprocal strategies insufficiently explored for my medium. So, in my research, I considered two reciprocal strategies. There are more, but I focused on the two quite extreme ones. Historically, the first is binding, and the second is point of contact. So historically, binding was famously applied by the Qingxie and Linda Montano in their rope piece from 1983-84, when they lived connected with each other by the rope for an entire year. And binding appeared in the context of collaborative drawing in the works of such duets as Max Dean and Dennis Evans, Helena Almeida and Arturo Rosa, in the work of a collective led by M. Lorem, and in Karali McCall's and Jane Gricewood's performance in Lisbon. However, in these examples, the partners move within a very limited range of efforts. Their bodies are constrained in space, in flow, in pressure, speed, and directivity as well. So this influences the exchange, which may be perceived one-sidedly as a constant fight, limitation, or sacrifice. Consequently, the drawn traces may also seem spatially or tonally non-diversified, quite poor in some cases. McCall's and Gricewood's interpretation, which you can see now on this slide, is slightly more complex. However, here nothing's being visibly drawn. In the co-experimentation with Olaf Kevnik and Ram Samocha, then after that, we learned to handle the rope in such ways to enable the broadest possible range of motions and efforts and directions. We also enabled regeneration of our bodies during the process and continuous access to the paper plane. So this eased the fight and harnessed the tensions, which enabled joint development of a more nuanced movement relationship and the drawn image. Point of contact is another reciprocal partnering strategies which you may have experienced in some ballroom dances or in contact improvisation, but particularly Latino dances or ballroom dances, the main experience, where the joint moving is about maintaining tension between the partner's hands and leading and following in contact, so that you may have perhaps experienced some in your life somewhere. And similar logic appears in Grotowski's actor training and in contact improvisation developed by or invented by Steve Paxton in the 70s, where the partners improvise and dance, they exchange efforts, and focus on sensation of weight and gravity. Now here the picture is quite poor because it was taken in the 70s and then it's quite pixelated, but what you can see here is the part of creativity exercises that distantly echoes the point of contact that I was explaining before a moment in drawing. So the creativity exercises were invented by artist pedagogues Dora Maurer and Miklos Erdeli. And the participants here would sit one next to another, and one holding and leading the other's hand by the wrist, like that. That would be more or less the logic of drawing in circle. In these and similar more recent examples or projects, I see only a partial understanding of the strategy. This again translates to stylistic, spatial, or qualitative poverty of marks and movement relationship. For point of contact is not that simple as one person holding and the other one following passively. In my co-experimentation with Yanni Caperna, we took into consideration so-called core movement values. one followed the other in contact by remaining ultra-sensitive to the signals coming from the other's body, giving support to the leader's hand, counterbalancing and changing the point of contact along the entire hand, and fluent transitioning between the leading and following roles. So all these values brought out the tension so far insufficiently explored in the collaborative projects involving point of contact. This tension enriched our movement relationship and consequently enabled diversity, better precision, and control over the drawn form. Another reason for the relevance of my research and effectiveness of my method are the additional frames, which I explained before, when they are applied jointly with the strategies, that is, the actions from the repertoire, the rules, and the diagrams. Now, to the methodology of my research. A slight change of subject. And my research develops bodily knowledge as I engage with drawing and movements. Bodily knowledge is hard to explain. It is tacit and unspecifiable. Despite that, I tried to articulate what happens in bodily awareness by utilizing the language of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Rudolf Laban, Edith Stein, or Maxine Sheets-Johnston. The practical part of my investigation was rooted in artistic research, and the theoretical part in phenomenological research. So in artistic research, I chose drawing and performance, Laban Movement Analysis, and reflection in action. This is a method developed by sociologist Donald Schoen, who identified a cyclical development of artistic process. So I started from the unknown. I didn't know what I was aiming at, basically. I just wanted contact in drawing, continuous contact, so that was problematic, how to develop it. And then I based on my previous knowledge with partnering strategies, I tested how this knowledge gets modified within the context of collaborative drawing, and then tried to evaluated in fact what are the opportunities and challenges each particular experimentation brings, to then enter the next level of experimentation based on those evaluations or those thoughts about the previous process. So it was a cyclical process of experimentation. The research was structured into two phases, a solo phase and a collaborative phase. The aim of the solo phase was to create this repertoire of actions. So I acted alone in the studio with the help of the LMA body category. I reviewed the spontaneous actions of the mark-making body and systemized them into a repertoire of actions for reciprocal drawing. I experimented by moving my whole body and marking this movement on the horizontal plane of paper, and I tried to identify those actions and gestures that assured mobility of my whole body, clarity of trace on paper, a possibility of building or developing larger compositional structures by traveling on the paper plane. I also considered if the trace was accessible, if I could observe it, and finally the absence of pain. And all this was needed for the future collaborative exchange to eliminate lack of coordination, basically, and assure this good coordination and some logic in relation to one another and the paper plane. So we knew what we were starting from. In the second phase, I co-experimented with Ola, Ran, and Janika. And separately with each of them, I conducted a number of public performances and studio sessions. And parts of it you could watch in the footage presented at the beginning of this presentation. In the co-experiments with Ola, we employed the strategy of binding, so we were connected by our wrists. And we performed rotary gestures from the repertoire, of course, and we followed a set of instructions, like, for example, the rope has to stay tight between us, and we will not exceed the paper plane. So these were two main rules, but there were some other ones, tinier ones, let's say. And such was the result of our exchange. It lasted for about an hour, an expansive textural plane, of which close-up you can see on the right-hand side. In the performances with RAM, we additionally used diagrams, simplified schemes that connected to my solo drawings, and which we tried to recreate collaboratively. So on the left-hand side, you can see the diagram, and on the right-hand side, you can see my solo drawing to which the diagram connected. Our imagining of the diagram during coaction facilitated our aiming in space. And such were the results of mine and Ram's two exchanges. In the co-experiments with Janika Pegna, the frames were the point of contact strategy, and the motives were extensions, flexions, floating, sliding, and flicking. A set of basic instructions, and diagrams that connected to my solo drawings. And one of them you can see here on this slide. And such were the results of our three exchanges. These drawings have more or less 3 by 3, 4 by 4 sometimes meters. Theoretical investigation was led by phenomenological research. So when the experimentation was finished, I first thoroughly described the whole experimentation process as I experienced it. I used everyday language, but also the language of LMA, which helped me better articulate the movement experience. And the personal and the movement analytic imbued my description with an interpretive component. At this stage, it came out that most preferred mental states, as Laban called them, for reciprocal drawing, are dream state, near state, and passion drive. Then, in the stage of analysis, I categorized the entire written material according to the emerging general themes. These were the drawing body, conflict, play, synergy, introspection, and partnership. In the third thematic interpretation stage, I reorganized the entire material from the previous stage according to what I intuitively acknowledged as two broader main thematic areas. And the first was the nature of reciprocal drawing as a co-embodied act. And the second was the relationships embodied through drawing. So now, what are the opportunities reciprocal drawing brings? Reciprocal drawing is a co-embodied act. It reinforces intentionality of actions. It builds physical spontaneity in the drawing process. The collaborators do not induce mental states by themselves, nor do they rely on changeable moods in creation of drawing, but rather generate them as a result of physical codependence with a partner. I explained this opportunity with Merleau-Ponty concepts of intentionality and reciprocity, reversibility of the body and the world. Reciprocal drawing has an expressive function. One person's gestures or gesture instantly modifies the other's gesture. Also, the collaborators can mutually demonstrate diverse ways of drawing to each other by direct touch, and so kinesthetically, empathically, expand their own expressive capabilities. I explained this through the concept of reciprocity, but also through Edith Stein concepts of reiterated empathy. I associate this expressive function also with Erdely's concept of creativity, understood as responsiveness and heightened awareness. Reciprocal drawing enables co-production of multiple complex compositions in drawing, but also transformation and expansion of the existent ones. So this juxtaposition here, which you can see on the slide well illustrates this opportunity. My solo drawings, to which the diagrams were connected, are in the far left column. And their transformed collaborative variations are in the far right column. The middle column presents the respective strategies of binding and point of contact through which the transformation was possible. Reciprocal drawing enables co-exploration of physicality from an angle of what I call a reversible resistance. This kind of resistance fluctuates in the body depending on the collaborator's determination of realization their goals in space, individual goals in space. In binding, this resistance is experienced more dynamically, which manifests in transformation of a drawing in cycles of coherence and distraction, while in point of contact, the reversible resistance is experienced in more subtle ways. Pedagogically, let's say, reciprocal drawing enables learning new approaches to drawing. This may sometimes be fluent and other times induce tensions, which I explain with Merleau-Ponty's concepts of abstract and concrete movement, body schema, figure, and differentiating field, personal body, abstract body, and repression. Reciprocal drawing strengthens the connection between perceptive body and the means of drawing. So one can fully merge with the developing marks and materials, and the partner presents themselves with immediacy. It is a very engaging now and here kind of practice. And within specific combination of frames, reciprocal drawing generates conflicts and power plays. It is both an internal and external conflict, because the formal opportunities intersect with the intersubjective tensions during the process. And consequently, reciprocal drawing is a means to rehearse and visualize these tensions, which then provides an opportunity for introspection and self-understanding with a view of the drawing in front of me. I identify a reciprocal drawing as a post-consensual, co-embodied practice. Two artists may deliberately reject consensus and explore the benefits of conflict for drawing without fear of losing their integrity. They become so-called cross-bench practitioners or complicities for one another. As Jean-Luc Nancy has pointed out, human history is about conflict and regaining, and our attempts of regaining intimacy. When different frames are set, the collaborators may as well practice harmony and concord in drawing. So, generally speaking, reciprocal drawing reflects the I-other relationship and the social aspect of human experience in more nuanced ways, similarly to Shea's and Montano's performance when they practice both commitment and conflict. Ethically, reciprocal drawing is about mutual balancing of bodily gains and losses. Loss is inscribed in this process because I eventually constrain my omnipotence, my ideas about drawing, for the sake of the other. So this reflection comes partially from Emmanuel Levinas' philosophy. The finalized drawings have a joint authorship. The equality is assured by the very character of the studied strategies, as these enable immediate reciprocation, and in this way I may free my collaborator from any obligations towards me. Supported by the theories of Victor Turner, Roger Caillois, and Brian Sutton Smith, I consider reciprocal drawing a rather serious, subversive, and transformative play that evokes trust and mutual attachment between the two practicing artists. It therefore has a solidifying function for the community. Honored opponent, thank you for listening to my lecture.
I'm called the opponent. this is my final bit of housekeeping, really. This does not sit easily with me, primarily because of what this situation is. That the opponent suggests that I'm here to pick holes in it, that I'm here to present a bar over which the work must climb in order to be recognised as valid, to give some official seal of approval to the process. And I would put it to you, the audience, and to my colleagues, that I think that that whole epistemological structure, the way it conceives the idea of truth, the way it conceives the idea of verifiability and validatability and the intersubjective movement of concept is antithetical to this work and to the process which Agnieszka has undergone. And so I have to ask myself, well, if I'm not here to be some pompous, Jarry-esque put her down of a stamp, what am I here to do? And the way that I have conceived of this is a piece of research which has been released into the world, and I am the first person who has been invited to engage with it, to see what it affords, to find out what avenues of further investigation it might offer. I'm a very big believer that the mark of a good piece of research is not the questions it answers, but the questions it requires further asking. So, and I'll just pick this up. So I happily take up this, this invitation, but I take it up not to judge this work, but to be part of the process of letting this work become what it might become. I have no doubt that it's an excellent, well-presented, beautifully written, the work is beautifully executed, all of that stuff, all the box tickings. It is a superbly high-quality piece of work, from its inception to its execution to the way it's written about. But I'm not here to assess that, as far as I can tell. And this brings into a broader question of how do we assess practice research? There has to be something of it of, gee, that was a nice picture. There has to be something of it of, what is the truth generated here? Is the process rigorous, and all of that kind of thing. But when we're talking about practice research, we are entering into what Martin Carlson's frame that he talked about performance generally. He said it is an essentially contested field. And I think that practice research is an essentially contested field, and that is where its knowledge is derived, is from that tension and contest. And excuse me if you are all experts in practice research, but I feel it behoves me to give some sort of background on the history of how come we have somebody dragging their body across a bit of paper with charcoal stuck to it in a university. In the 1980s, movements started to happen in universities where they started to take over the control of art schools. Artists were attracted to funding offering that universities were offering. There was an arbitrary meeting of two different types of learning institutions. And ever since then, it's like a 50, 60-year history, and we are still trying to work out, where is the art? Where is the knowledge? How does it fit into this institution? How do we bend these ancient rules, these funny hats and things like that? How do we bring this to artistic practice? And how do we make artistic practice work here? Or how do we change the institution to accommodate the truths that we generate as artistic practitioners? There have been many attempts made over the last 40 years to classify and categorize different types of practice-based research, practice-led research, research-led practice. There is an infinite panoply of terms that have attempted to catch what we're doing and categorize it, but the work always escapes. And what I have in my experience of both supervising and assessing a lot of these kind of projects and being a research practitioner myself, a performance researcher, that it really comes down the question of how we assess this and where it's essentially it's a relationship between the practice and the writing. The practice, the writing, and the conceptual apparatus. In my experience, every single practice research project I've looked at figures the relationship between these three things slightly differently. But within those, there are general trends of the way in which the writing relates to the practice. There is the exegetical approach, which is the more traditional, where the artist paints a picture and says, I did this, I did that. The process happened here. We met an obstacle in this. We overcame it this way. This is an exegetical approach. Another tendency is where the work is used to make a parallel investigation of something in the world, some phenomenon in the world, some social or cultural or everyday phenomenon, and the writing conducts the research on one track and the practice conducts the research on another track, such as I write a play about movements of refugees in the 1990s, and I study documents of the movements of refugees in the 1990s, and I write something that investigates from a different angle. And the third tendency is where the writing and the practice are mutually intertwined and where they co-create each other and they inform each other and they are embedded in each other. Whilst I think that this project tends towards, in the bulk of the writing that you have submitted, towards an exegetical model, the pull towards the way in which the work is informed by the writing and the way the writing is informed by the practice moves you towards the third of these approaches, which just happens to be my favorite one. And within this, there are tendencies, one, to do research which investigates the practice itself. I painted these pictures using these brushes I made with these materials. And this is a new thing because it had this effect and it enabled me to create something new. This is research into the practice itself, or the use of the practice. The other tendency at the other extreme is to use the practice to investigate something in the world, such as here, where it becomes an investigation of a lot of different themes, which I will touch on later, but such as empathy, embodiment, and epistemology itself. But the primary question in all of that, when we're talking about practice research, and we're trying to hold it down long enough to be able to say this exists in a university, in order for that to happen, the primary question should be, what types of knowledge are afforded and being produced here? And this is where I've come into this work. I'm asking what kind of knowledge is being produced here. And in a doctoral context, the primary question should always be, I believe, what is the new knowledge that is being produced here? In every doctorate I've ever supervised, it's what I come in with, what I come back to. Two things. What's the question and what's the new knowledge that's being produced here? So this is where I come in. This situates this project. just a brief rundown. Agnieszka has spoken quite eloquently on these few things here. It's a project which concerns collaborative performative drawing process. We have that. The research question, and this is an important point here that I'd like to pick up with you when we sit down and talk. The research question says, what can artistic practice of drawing gain from the collaborative and reciprocal strategies of binding and point of contact when considered through Laban Movement Analysis and phenomenologically oriented artistic research? That's a lot. And also, the candidate informs us that in the solo phase of my research, I asked which Laban Movement Analysis body actions can be used by the collaborators in their reciprocal exchange, and how should they be modified to facilitate the joint marking in direct contact with the two-dimensional horizontal plane. Now, you will notice that there is a lot of words in those two questions. This is generally because the initial research question is usually a pointer with somebody trying to grapple with something that hasn't presented to them fully yet, and they're writing their way around it and into it. And the job of the research itself is to find out what are the more, I was going to say the real questions, the truer questions, but that's not the issue. What are the more profound questions that are calling from behind this research question? Okay. I think at this point, I would like to invite you to sit down, Agnieszka. Thank you. And we can get into it. Oh God, I just had an urge to go. Any questions so far? I'm still a university lecturer. Okay. So your work is the work itself, the drawings are conducted in a detailed, systematic, reflexive manner. The experiments are tightly drawn and executed. They proceed in an iterative fashion. The methodology and it's tight. And it's tight, it's appropriate, and it's effective. The bulk of your written thesis is the minutely and exquisitely detailed descriptions of the practice, which were just a joy to read. I don't know if any of you have read much artist description of practice. It's not always a pleasant experience, but this was most enjoyable. And you bring a body of philosophical work, primarily phenomenological, Merleau-Ponty, Levinas, Lakoff and Johnson, Pavilion, Nancy, Stein, Sheets, Johnson, von Manen, Varela. You've got all the right stuff on board there. Your conceptual apparatus is waterproof. It's airtight. It's appropriate. They are the right means towards the way in which you want to ask this question. And they are, I think, means that in your work begin to yield very useful results. And this is combined with a heavy drawing on performance theory from Goffman and Schechner and Turner, Carlson and others, Kaiwa. And all of this whole thing, the artistic process, the descriptions and the thematic, the way in which you bring this body of philosophical knowledge to it is clearly articulated. It's done really well. I don't feel that I should be desperately with a magnifying glass or a microscope trying to find fault in what you've done. I think that would be completely irrelevant. Also, the work itself, I don't think I'm here to judge the work itself. All I would like to say about the work itself is I would like to have it on my wall. I can't say anything else apart from that about a work of art when I'm in a frame of assessing, judging. I don't think that's my business here. But with what I've said and the epistemological questions that I've raised, I do have a bunch of questions here for you, some of which are big and vague in general, some of which are specific.
Mm-hmm.
Please feel free to answer or not as you see fit. So I said the most important question in a doctoral thesis is what new knowledge is being produced here. Can you?
New knowledge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you do that in a nutshell?
Nutshell. Approaching it from, there are two spheres, so to say, which you probably may have noticed already when I was giving my presentation, that there is a very formal sphere, and then there is a theoretical, emotional, spiritual, almost to say, sphere. And the formal sphere has been so far very important for me, as well from the point of view of a practitioner in drawing and of a performance person, of a dancer as well. As I was explaining, I noticed that as some people can freely move in dance or in actors training or in particular circumstances where the bodies are generating certain dialogue, this is inapproachable or inaccessible within the context of drawing. So this was my first kind of basic need to tackle. Why is it so, and what can I bring, and how can I bring this into drawing, what I experience in dance and performance when I'm co-experiencing with another person in those conditions. So in this sense, this knowledge that is that has been developed here covers a huge blank dark area, as I was explaining, and gives people, but also first of all myself and my collaborator, tools to co-act and conduct an interchange of paper that is very complex. It's much more complex than the usual so far seen and experienced exchanges within the context of collaborative drawing. And here the important foundation is the Laban Movement Analysis and the reciprocal and the repertoire of actions that I developed. It is not just a random action that I treat as a motive, let's say, but it is a set of actions that can be picked out by both of us and co-developed, co-interpreted on paper. Because and this very aspect gives a lot of chances for a quality exchange between people within the context of drawing. A more nuanced approach than that it has been stated so far. On the emotional and epistemological plane, this type of approach that has those three frames, the repertoire of actions, the strategy, and the rules and diagrams, this kind of approach, when it's connected, when these three are connected, it provides an experience which is which emanates not only conflict and laborious understanding of relationship as a laborious limiting experience, but gives a chance for us, for the practitioners, drawers, experience something of a more nuanced exchange, where there is a where there are both types of experiences. Yes, there is a conflict, there are tensions, there is a revenge, there is a feeling of loss and gain, but also there is a harmony, and there is a practice of prolonged, like dancers or performers do when they dance together and touch each other and exchange their bodily energy. There is a chance to co-experience that for a longer time and enjoy this in movement. And then when you enter this bodily knowledge realm and you experience these qualities, very, very extreme sometimes qualities of conflict and harmony and concord through the body, you may relate that somehow, or one may relate that to to their experience of partnership, generally speaking. So that would mean that we have access to our own lives as individuals who exist in a partnership, in marriage or in professional relations and so on. So this gives us access, more quality-like, let's say, access. It is visualized. We can introspect this, what we have experienced on paper, and then relate that to our own experience of relationships. So that in a bulk, let's say, is my main contribution. I gather what was not covered within the context of drawing. I bring the tools for people to collaborate, to establish a complex relationship within the context of drawing, and then I throw those experiences onto what I experienced in my relationships with people. And this is like an entry to thinking, to introspection on how I interact with another person in real life, let's say. And of course, I can do that through dance when I experience, let's say, complex codependence with another in space, and I move in other directions and levels and planes of movement. But that has been covered by many choreographers and many artists, yes, this type of movement. And here on the paper plane, in my view, in my experience, this is something new, that I can not only experience that on the paper plane, but also visualize that and have as I said, think about that through, or treat this as a lens, as an entry to my own experience of the world and relationships with other people.
Mm-hmm. And this leads me into my next question.
And just excuse me, too. There is this, as far as these three frames are concerned, this is very important because these frames have not been compiled in this way before. They have been, let's say, if a person or two people draw on paper, they usually close this type of relation or experiment as a one-off meeting, as a one-off pairing, let's say. And here, this context of a repertoire, which is quite complex selection of different gestures and bodily actions, when this is reopened and re-established many times, even with the same person, it gives different options of moving and different options of interpreting these actions and gestures. So it's not only a one-off meeting. Two persons can meet together and co-experience through the selection of different parameters, let's say, a different dynamics of the relationship, of their own relationship, or relate to that to some other context.
This is the value, I think, of practice research. Is we use different methods and different epistemologies to bring two worldly phenomena to understand differently, and hopefully our more embodied approach, a more performative approach, can provide different answers than a philosopher sitting in a chair writing syllogisms. So this concept of embodied knowledge, you do a good but brief job of outlining its history through know how, know that, Ryle,
Polanyi,
Polanyi, etc., Borgdorf. But I'm still not sure, and I have never been sure, whether it's appropriate to use the term embodied knowledge. Does the body know? Or is there something else that is happening here other than knowing? And also we use the term knowledge as a noun as something that exists, that is a thing in the world, I think what we're talking about is not knowledge, it's knowing. And I would use the term performative knowing rather than embodied knowledge for my own practice. Do you have any reflections or comments to make on why you use the term embodied knowledge and what you think it affords?
Frankly saying, I have discovered this concept and kept to the terminology that let me be clear and communicate with other researchers on that basis, that we are distinguishing certain types of knowledge. And I did not have any need to create other concepts or other to verbalize this type of knowledge in a different way. Bodily knowledge, performative knowing. That's an interesting question. Bodily knowledge is something that strictly, this concept, this term strictly connects to the body. Whereas performance, as it engages the body, it also engages conceptual layer. It's quite a strong conceptual layer. And I'm not sure that would be more appropriate for this type of experimentation. I wouldn't like to lead the reader into some other associations here. And I guess does as you asked before, does the body know? It does know, and it has a very and here there is another question that appears in my mind. Can we treat the body really as an entry to knowing the other? And where is the border within this realm of bodily knowledge, where after crossing of which we are not able to guess or to see, to know what is happening with the other person? Because there's this aspect of when I jointly move with another person, there is this aspect of, as Merleau-Ponty was describing, of repression of our body's habitual possibilities, and reshaping the whole situation by accommodation, which assumes repression of our habits, and forming this co-movement, or in this case my personal movement, into something that I project. So this particular process demands accommodation to another person, not only joint accommodation, but my own accommodation. And then if I address this and I observe how I accommodate really with my whole body, with my thoughts and my feelings, everything that is happening there at this stage of accommodation to another person's movement, can I transpose or relay these experiences onto my own relation in real life with other people? Is this how my accommodation is happening, or is it just this bodily domain, and this is typical for everybody? So that's, if you know what if you honored opponent know what I mean. Because we may also continue this conversation, but just to touch upon the subject, Levinas says that we are speaking about ethics by consideration of our interpersonal relationships, first of all, and then how we can how the other's presence transforms us. But then there is this aspect of accommodation which comes next in my associations, in my thoughts. And Levinas says that we are not able to. I mean, as soon as we are trying to accommodate, we are assuming that we are bringing this person to our own level of understanding. So I think that within the bodily contexts, this is where I believe I can learn a lot about how I accommodate to another person, how I limit myself, how I limit my omnipotence, let's say, about drawing, and also about how my own life is going to look like when I'm in a relationship, and whether I can do that through conversation with another person, or whether I can do that through my own analysis of my own state of mind. Mm-hmm. So bodily knowledge, let's say, gives us this opportunity to summarize, to somehow relay or transpose what we are experiencing in the relation, in the body's relation, to somehow transpose it onto real relationships in the real life between people.
And do you think by working with the concept of embodiment, mm-hmm. that this enables you to find a new way in to the questions? Do you think it provides a kind of some sort of structural platform on which what we usually think is an emotional and intellectual process of mm-hmm. apprehending another person?
Absolutely.
I think it shows some substructure or something of that.
As I said, I believe it very much does. So it's the entire concept of empathy, which is also it's limited somehow, but it gives us access to knowing the other, and also knowing ourselves through positioning ourselves, let's say, in the shoes or in the feet or in the point of view of the other person. It gives us a chance to somehow expand the realizations as far as the relationships are concerned.
So in the context of the last couple of answers that you made, mm-hmm. at the end in your summary of your thesis, you state, I think it's point 10, mm-hmm. The next things that you need to do is to readdress the research question and the emergent opportunities within the context of Merleau-Ponty's philosophy of embodiment, selected concepts from the theory of performance drawing and collaboration, and the ethical aspects of Jean-Luc Nancy's and Emmanuel Levinas's philosophies. As you sit here now, mm-hmm. having done that process and having done that reassessment, what new questions are you dealing with now, rather than that very technique-based wordy thing to do with Laban and drawing? What has appeared from behind that research question? It suggests that you started out with an aim to research the practice itself, but by the end, you're actually starting to ask and answer more fundamental questions about being human. In that light, would you reframe, or how would you reframe your research question at this point?
I was writing about that in summary. If I understand your question correctly, I was writing about that in summary, that that once I meet with a peer, let's say with an equal, who is another artist, we are exposed to one another, our vulnerabilities, our tensions, our internal conflicts are kind of exposed in different ways. We may guess, as far as these conflicts and tensions are concerned, what the other is experiencing, but we may not define that clearly because we are not speaking about that. Mm-hmm. We're only experiencing that through the body. So the next question would be, for me, first of all, in the pedagogical context, how that would relate to the experience with a student. Mm-hmm. And that would have to be much more clarified, what I'm doing here and what are my motives, how the person is directly experiencing my physical presence, the embodied pedagogy, let's say, how that affects the student. That wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible just to go at it, in such a spontaneous way as I did with my collaborators here in this research. So the next questions would be how, first of all, questioning my own motives, why I'm doing this with with a student now and not another artist of equal status? Why am I doing this? I have not answered this question. I have a need to teach through direct contact, but I have not answered that completely. What is my position here? What my position would be here? Why wouldn't I be able to teach, for example, by direct contact, by making people of the same status, let's say two students meet on the paper without my engagement there? I could also be doing this, but I have a need to approach this person directly. So my next question would be exactly as I said, what are my motives? I would probe this. I would write about that in not a manner in a manner that I wrote in this thesis, in a more personal manner. And my next question, and another next to it, would be also the question: what then this particular method of reciprocal drawing brings for the student, and how far is the student moving forward with this? What is happening within the body context, with what is happening between myself and the student in this particular bodily relation that I have or established with the student. So these are.
So it becomes a site of an examination in greater complexity of the relationship.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
right. Mm-hmm.
To bring that down to some more specific themes rather than the general ones I've been talking about,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to me that empathy,
Mm-hmm.
the history, the phenomenological history of empathy, is the primary theoretical, conceptual kind of investigation happening here,
Mm-hmm.
where that can be what your work can add to that history and that process. And in that you use Stein and Levinas well to make this a theme. The idea of susceptibility, exposure and permeability as preconditions of apprehending and being apprehended by the other person. And I think that Merleau-Ponty's work on the chiasm is very useful here, because at that point where the two bodies meet and experience the what did you call it? Not consensus, the conflict, consensus, the harmony, the accord.
Concord.
Yeah, all of those things that occur are the point where the bodies actually meet, and the process of both of you serving this other function of doing a drawing directs and shapes how that necessarily proceeds. And so, as I think with all art, there is an opportunity here really directly and literally, more so than in most other art. But as with all art, it's about the giving over of yourself to the thing that is seeking to become created. In my own experience working collaboratively in dance, and working closely through touch and through and lots with strings and ropes, as Butoh dancer, it seems to me that there is a point at which the work itself takes over, at which, when you're doing this who's touching who Merleau-Ponty exercise, and one person is the leader and the other person is the leader, who is being the toucher and who is the touched. There is a point where neither is the leader, where the thing itself becomes that which leads. In your work, was that phenomenon happening, where the work itself began to dictate the process?
No, rarely. And I'll tell you why, your opponent. I'll tell you why, because it's my understanding of reciprocal process might be completely different from what many people tend to do with this concept. I believe that there is a, as Merleau-Ponty says, we are influencing the other in the same, or the reality around us, broadly speaking, but also the other and the objects in the same manner as they're influencing us. So there is logically speaking, when we stick to this base or this foundation, there is some kind of active engagement of both agents. And here with this foundation, we come to the question, what is the process, basically? What is the process about? Is it about being, like, let's say, throwing a proverbial coin and let it lead us, let this process lead us to wherever it goes, or let the process expand and show us the way? Or if it's a question of us really shaping actively from two sides as two vectors kind of colliding and shaping what we call process eventually. So it's and I was trying within this experimentation process, I was trying to stick to my projection of movement. And I was also perhaps expecting, and I got that my partner was also projecting what he was aiming at. That was, of course, initiated by the diagram, but we jointly co-interpreted the diagram, and his projection was, or her projection for that matter, could have been slightly different than mine, but we both stuck to our projections, and the process developed at the intersections of our projections, if you know what I mean. So it's not that I suddenly gave up my projection and started following the other's projection, or my understanding of his or her projection, or empathic kind of, I was not trying to somehow let's say guess what his or her projection is. I was sticking to my projection of movement, which was dictated by the diagram. And then, of course, I allowed myself experiencing different tensions and hesitancies and lack of balance as I experienced it. But basically, how that relates to life, it makes us wonder whether life is really not about us actively shaping it, rather than just waiting for events to develop. I'm not. I mean, what I try to convey here is that most people in our culture, so to say, I know that you may not like this word too much, but most people in our culture are different from the kind of a Buddha or Eastern or Far East experience, Buddhist experience of process. Yes, that we are actively shaping, and the process shaping our lives. We're trying to shape and influence our lives, and this we're not waiting passively. We're not following. We're not doing this when we're I'm not being held by somebody else's hand, but I'm actively pushing and pulling and exchanging. And I'm doing this because I have a vision in my mind that I can affect this person somehow, but I'm also getting the same from the other side. So it's an active evolvement, and the process happens at the collision of these two aimings, so to say. So and that relates somehow. I'm rooted in my culture in the sense that that in practical situations, I'm also trying to affect what we call process with my own expectations, with my own. I'm shaping life, right? And of course, life is shaping me. But there's it's not that I'm passive with it. I may go between the duality of passive, active, but it's not that I'm staying on one side constantly. I'm still wandering between exertion, recuperation, active, passive. It's just it's constant flow. But the aim is to realize the goal.
And so it always remains a willed politics.
Willed. Mm-hmm.
And
I wouldn't be. I'm quite cautious because I wouldn't be going into politics at this point. I wouldn't like it to go that far and kind of burst to all dimensions of our lives. But as far as partnerships are concerned, it's a very vital assumption that we are not passive, we are not being led constantly, that we are active, we are able to affect the other, and we are affected by the other, and the process that we are experiencing in our lives, whatever happens in our lives, is at the intersection of many different stimuli, let's say.
Good. To move on to another specific question of the work itself, we have everything we've been talking about is the relationship between the two moving bodies. But as you say, there is an aim and the project, and the project is to leave marks on paper, which, as you say, you've taken dance into drawing, you've combined the two. What interests me in this is, as a performer, I'm always intoxicated by the continual onrush of the perpetual presencing of the moment, and that it goes and passes, and the thrill of being in that perpetual passing. And yet in this practice, there's a writing that's happening, or it's not quite a proto-writing, the leaving of the mark of this performance having occurred. And so those are really, really different temporalities. One is this performative temporality of the permanent presencing, and the one is that the past of the leaving of the marks.
Yeah.
How does that figure in your thinking, that you are combining these two different temporal moments, and how do they work together, or how do they come apart?
As I was saying, the drawing itself is a record on one hand, but it can also become an independent work of art. In the sense, I know that there, in performative drawing or performance drawing, there is this tendency to throw all the marks into one bag and call them records or remnants from co-action. But as far as I respect that thinking, and see drawings, performative drawings, as some relics or remnants of the performative itself, I think that also with an appropriate approach, engaging those frames that I talked about, one can, or people can, create a drawing which is a completely independent entity, in the sense that it can be employed to different contexts and kind of go out of this performative context right away and serve from a very basic type of visual illustration of something to, it can connect to very personal memories that are completely unrelated to what I had experienced in the process while doing it or working on it, to it could be used as well as a part of a design, or it can be applied in different contexts, if you know what I mean. So it's by working within these frames, I was trying to give the performative aspect long enough time to create a kind of a complex and compact drawing that has the means of expression that are typical for drawing inscribed into it. That is composition, tonality, a certain aspect of marks that can be completely diverse, beautiful, and spontaneous. And with this load of goodness, it could be itself an independent product, if you know what I mean. While oftentimes, and I do not disregard these types of works, but oftentimes the relics or so-called records of performative drawing, they do not speak in any way. They're just forever fused with the experienced. They just speak what the experience was about. They're fused with the experienced, and how I would describe it or define it, then oftentimes the materiality of it is completely, it is a chaos, let's say. It's just, as Tricia Brown was saying, the marks that do not add up to anything. And I understand, let's say that the performative actions of many classics of performance from the 70s, they were simply about performing an action on paper or running and leaving some kind of a trace on the wall. You know, it's I completely respect that and understand that, and I think it's a great experience of own physicality and materiality of movement and mark. But then these marks on the wall or this crashed coal, it's just fused with this experience. It does not exist by itself anymore. So I think my methods, if I may call it so, covers both aspects.
Mm-hmm. And so it resounds in the world in a different way.
Yes. Plus the works that I was showing the the table here. On the left-hand side, there were those solo works, and then there is a possibility, if I may add, the next point, there is a possibility of transformation of these drawings through movement into some other entities, and then perhaps taking these collaborative drawings back to my own studio and working on them further on. So there is a continuous engagement with the product itself beyond the performative. Yeah.
Great. Just one really final little question. It's the only thing where I felt that I was unclear on what you were saying when you were reading. But it's not really the pointing out of a shortcoming or a criticism or anything like that. It's just trying to open up a question. And I think it's interesting because it goes to your answer on the will. And the giving over to the work, like the Gelassenheit that I was proposing, and that's in the question of intentionality. It's a term of some debate within phenomenological philosophy, the history of the term intentionality. Most, definitely analytic philosophers, but most phenomenologists would say that intentionality has nothing to do with intention. Intentionality has nothing to do with purpose or intent. Intentionality is about the way the world gives itself to us, the way we have the world, the way we are in the world. And so you have the history from Husserl of I perform a noetic act, which is informed by a noematic structure, and therefore I can go table. And I have the table in a certain way. And you get to Heidegger, whose way of intentionality is we are in the world amongst these things, and they make us as much as we make them. And you have the Levinasian intentionality of enjoyment, Merleau-Ponty's operative intentionality, the intentional arc. This development is all a history of the way in which we have the world and the world affects us. It was only Levinas who reintroduced the question of purpose and intent. He said, you can't have the world in any way without the intention that is lurking behind the intentionality. How do you understand the term intentionality? And in the phenomenological history of the use of the term, which is primarily about givenness, or in analytic philosophy, which is about representations in the brain, or whatever they think in that world. Where do you stand on this question of intentionality? Because I think if you take the intention out of intentionality, it opens up a way into understanding things more from a position of Gelassenheit and letting be and being affected by, being moved by, rather than being that willed intender.
There are two levels of understanding here, which I may bring up. The first one is somehow still connected to intention, which you were doubting in. Let's put it in that way. In one of Grotowski's writings, I was quite impressed by what he was saying about the performer's lack of intention in a gesture. So if a performer is making a gesture, there is no projective behind the gesture. There is no connection to the wider context. And the gesture is simply dead, and then resultantly the viewer is embarrassed because he or she does not feel the truth in the gesture. So intentionality from this perspective, as I understood it, but also from Merleau-Ponty's perspective, because it's a embodied intentionality, is about going at an object of experience with a full understanding and intention, in the sense that there's a there's a wider, broader context that makes this movement truthful. And in the context of a performer, in Grotowski's training, for example, two people meet and they pick out an action and they throw this action into the reciprocal context, and the other is what makes this movement intentional, because the gestures is kind of imbued with emotion, is imbued with provocation, is imbued with how the other affects this motion, if I'm expressing myself correctly. So I hope you understand. So without this real life aspect, this motion lacks intentionality, and that I tried also transpose to the drawing context and to the mark itself. For the mark to be perceived by the author, but perhaps also by many other viewers of the mark when the drawing is hanging in the gallery or in any other wall, let's say, there is a tangible lack of intention or intentionality in this context, in the sense that those marks do not bear a broader load or truth in the gesture that has been there to leave it. So that's one plane, and I'm hoping that this particular practice makes those marks powerful and truthful, that I ascend or go over these speculations of where I am, what I'm doing, where is my context, what I could be doing if I were that or that, or if I were, let's say, if I'm stylistically closer to this one or that one trend, or it's the presence of the other brings the marks and the gestures into a certain live context that I really emanate, that I can find myself through the presence of the other. I can find the real me, let's say, or the more truthful me. And so that's one aspect. And the other aspect, or the other level of understanding intentionality, is something that I hope to have described in the introduction to the thematic interpretation part, where I state that my intention goes towards the gesture that I make goes towards the paper, and then towards the partner, and that exceeds this particular triple relation, exceeds itself or goes further out into the world, let's say, to the context of the studio that makes our marks and our relationship such, not other, but of a concrete character. And then the context, the spatial context, let's say Janika's studio placed at the Hudson River in New York, makes this particular exchange a very subtle and very warm and intimate experience. So, and then even a broader context, then if I see myself and experience myself being there with her, then she's the connector and she's the one who exposes me, and I'm exposed to the broader artistic community of those people who work in this particular way and not any other way. So I'm contextualizing, and I'm drawing broader and broader circles that go out, let's say, from this engagement with a mark to broader context, not only American context, but world context. As you know, I had been experiencing these situations in different countries, but also in my own country in Warsaw, in some completely dilapidating buildings and factories. So it all shifts the focus, shifts the intentionality of this whole situation. Let's say, these are the two levels of understanding of my understanding of the concept of intentionality.
How has this research affected, changed, inflected, or transformed your practice, your life, your person?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I have to say that I stopped drawing at a certain point because I had to start writing about it. So, but in the retrospect, I may say that, first of all, I see myself, or I had realized things about myself that I only presumed were real. But then after that practice, I had realized them quite clearly. Mm-hmm. And I will not be going into those very personal remarks, but I think that one important thing is that the realization that when in contact with another persons or even with groups of people, I tend to either lose myself in sacrificial efforts or withdraw completely from contact. So it's so this practice has really made it possible for me, hopefully in the future, to go from these two extremes to the middle, because I can kind of, it gives me an opportunity to go back and forth between solitude and being in relation with artists, with other people of the community, let's say. And yeah, and that's the main point of this whole story, that there is a chance to marry these two quite extreme phases that I experienced in my life. Plus, also, going back to the beginning of this conversation when you were speaking about bodily knowledge and how that may relate to real life, there is this moment I remember in the co-experience with Ram when I was trying to stabilize the entire situation by maintaining rigid, and I had a constrained flow. And that also taught me a lot, how I empathically, I perhaps too much go empathically into another person to enable this person to uncover the most let's say spontaneous self. And I do that sometimes at the price of my own spontaneity. So yeah, but that is one of the many aspects that I discovered during and after. So I may not be speaking about those at this point because this is too personal, but I guess the general realization here is that the practice enables self-understanding.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'll just share my own experience of my own PhD. My PhD was a phenomenology of being in audience. And I don't know why I was studying that, but at the end of it, I realized that I had to do that because of two things. One, I didn't know how to be among other people.
Yeah.
And two, I didn't know how to get off the stage. All right. Well, can I invite you to stand? Is this?
Mhm.
Hello, Agnieszka. This is in my 2 decades or more of being involved with doctoral projects, and many practice doctoral projects across music and dance and theatre, into translation studies, where I've operated as supervisor, examiner, co-researcher, administrator, across the whole thing. In that whole time, dozens and dozens of projects. I've never come across anything that is a more well-balanced handling of the practice, the theoretical component, and the way it should resound in the world. I've seen many that do it as well, because there is a point at which such statements become meaningless in these areas, that this one's better than that one. You can't say that. Sure. But I've never seen one that does it better. And so I propose that the doctoral program committee should accept this dissertation.
Thank you.
And the respondent thanks the opponent and turns to the audience, but I'll hand over to the custos now. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone present wishes to comment, to leave any comments concerning my dissertation, please ask the custos for the floor.
Do we sit now?
Yeah.
The dissertation proceedings are closed.